Following show are solely those of the host, not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Two Guys from Verona, with hosts Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella. Each week, they bring you their take on the world today. Dan Perkins is a financial expert, a regular columnist for the Hill website, best-selling author, and founder of a nonprofit foundation for our injured veterans. Don Mazzella brings his years of journalism experience and insights to the world today. He's a veteran newsman currently running a series of online newsletters and magazines, and is also a book author and on the board of the National Robotic Education Foundation. Together on each program, these men will provide thought-provoking ideas and commentary on what is happening politically, financially, and socially. They will also give listeners a heads up on future happenings. We start off each program with Dan Perkins' essay on what he considers an important issue facing us.
Good evening and welcome to our show. Good evening, Don.
How you doing?
Pretty good. A lot to talk about today. I'm going to start off talking about whether or not Hillary Clinton is committing gaffes or there's something even more sinister in her background. I'll give you the three examples that has me concerned. After the Nancy Reagan funeral, she went on to this great, eloquent praise of Ronald Reagan and his support from the very beginning for gay men and AIDS and HIV, which was not true. He did do some work at the end of his presidency, but not at the beginning. She went in on 2 days later and was doing a tour, and she was talking about how she's going to end mining and put a lot of miners and mines out of work. And they tried to walk that back. And then a week ago, Monday night, she was talking at a town hall when she made the statement that no Americans lost their lives in Benghazi or Libya while on her watch. Well, obviously, 4 did die in Benghazi, and those 4 were Ambassador Stevens. And, Don, I think in terms of what I call seminal moments in a campaign, and some of them are hilarious and some of them are quite tragic. Ronald Reagan, I'll never forget his quote, "I'm paying for this microphone." And then there was Mr. Dukakis in his pith helmet and his steel pot and sitting in the tank where he looked like a doofus. I think that Mrs. Clinton may have had her seminal moment when she couldn't remember that 4 Americans died in Benghazi, and especially an ambassador. You would think that a person who had spent as many hours testifying before Congress about this very incident, when asked a simple question about foreign policy, and she chose to make the statement that no Americans died on her watch in Libya. I'm wondering whether there isn't a problem. I know you and I, Don, have talked about. She seems tired. She looks really drawn out and haggard, and so I'm not a doctor, and I won't say that she's got Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever, but I question whether she has the stamina. And if you want to see a really good example of what stamina is necessary, look at the picture of Barack Obama on inauguration and look at him today. He's a much older, worn down, grayer man. Don?
Well, Dan, you brought this up, and I did a little digging, and I asked somebody within her campaign, Hillary Clinton's campaign, and this is a longtime aide, and the aide said to me that Hillary Clinton has a great ability to forget things that are unpleasant, and to be able to. Well, not necessarily, but the real point about what she does is she completely lets things go, and just looks on into the future. This, by the way, this aide was being very positive about it, and I also brought up how you felt about it. She said that Hillary Clinton has the ability to run down get a few hours rest, and come back roaring. Well, when I pointed out that it seems that she needs some rest, she said, well, she took the Monday morning off. And I said, that was wonderful, but how is she going to do in a campaign, a coming presidential campaign? And the aide said she intends to rest 1 day a week in the campaign after the convention. Tends to take a 2 week vacation um, after the convention and then rest 1 day a week. It reminds me, you brought up some incidents with Ronald Reagan, but if you remember, he won his second election the night during the debate when he said, I will not hold age as a problem. I will not hold Senator Mondale to being younger than myself. If you
Right.
remember, I'm
I do remember
quoting.
that. Yes, sure.
And
Yeah.
so the point being that I think you're right. I think there are things wrong, but here's what the Clinton camp is saying. By the way, we were not the first ones to ask this, and you didn't mention about the Face the Nation um, story on Sunday, and I'd like you to kind of go into that
Sure.
because I think that's more important.
Yeah. The Face the Nation story that Don is referring to is that Face the Nation on CBS News, when Bill Clinton was president, used to be called the Clinton Broadcasting Network. Face the Nation did a survey of eligible voters, and they shared responses, and you can get this on the internet if you want to go find it. And there were two responses that I was absolutely floored that they even would even consider sharing. You know, remember this is CBS. This is a mainstream liberal media outlet. The first quote was, "Mrs. Clinton is lying about lying," and the second quote is, "If you turn the sound down, you can still tell she's lying." I thought it was just amazing that mainstream media would allow that kind of criticism of their favorite candidate on the air, but they did.
Well, I think it's because the Clinton camp hopes to get all of these objections out of the way before the main campaign. So she can say in the debate, well, we've discussed that before, and we've all gone over that ground, and we can move on to new things.
Mm.
That's their plan. They have a plan for the presidential campaign, which, by the way, I still do not believe she will be the presidential candidate of the Democratic Party. Their plan is a new beginning. That's going to be in some form the basis of her campaign. But also, I thought it was interesting what Bill Clinton said last night, and you quoted earlier, and I read about in in two places, that he actually said we have to end eight years of bad rule. I
Right.
found that fascinating, a fascinating comment.
Well, we got to take a break. Got to go to our first commercial cut, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona with Dan Perkins and
That was pretty good, Dan.
They'll be right back after a word from their sponsor.
All right, guys, you're clear.
I hope we were clear when you made that comment. Anyway, I want to come back with a piece of news that I just saw before we went on the air. There's a report out that the Justice Department is going to offer immunity to Mrs. Abedin, who was, or I guess Mrs. Weiner would be the right name, but Uma's supposedly going to get immunity from prosecution by testifying before a grand jury that supposedly is being called by the Justice Department.
Dan, do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, you do. You hit the right button.
Is it better phone?
Yes.
Dan, I ran down that rumor between the time we talked about it at 5 and now. No truth to the rumor.
Okay.
I've been wrong before, but I think we should go with it. But I'm not going to say it on the air, but I'm just giving you a heads up that they think that's a spurious rumor, and that the Clinton camp would never permit her she'd be gone if she took the immunity plea.
Well, I think I'll take your advice. I'm going to go ahead and do it, but I'll put a disclaimer in front of it.
Okay, I just want to protect you.
And then what do you want to go into next?
I still want to talk about gun control.
Okay, we'll do that. And then
The,
we'll
and
talk
taser.
about.
8-hour audio program
All right, fellas,
designed to
coming
help
back.
veterans fall asleep.
We good to go?
1,500
Yeah.
plus vets
All right.
now participating. It's our goal to deliver 1,000 audio players this year. To learn how you can help, go to our website at songsandstoriesforsoldiers.us. Help us to help a veteran make it through the night.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Don, before we get on to our next segment, I wanted just to share with the audience something I read today. I have no way of knowing whether it's true or false or somebody's floating it for whatever reason, but I did see a report this afternoon that the Justice Department may be considering offering immunity from prosecution to Uma, who was, I guess, the Assistant Chief of Staff to Hillary Clinton when she was at the State Department. I don't know whether it's true or not, but again, another piece of information coming out, and they're saying that the Justice Department is considering setting up a grand jury to look at what the FBI. So I don't know whether it's possible to set up a grand jury without Loretta Lynch's approval, but maybe it is. But I don't know what autonomy the attorneys have inside the Justice Department, especially who might be working on this case. But I thought it was noteworthy that there's still more stuff coming out. And you're right that the comment from Bill Clinton, he's done more to detract from Hillary since he's come on the trail with more controversy than perhaps he's been worth on the positive side. But we got to move on. You want to talk about guns?
Yeah. Before we do, remember there's no love lost between the Clintons and the Obamas. Keep that in mind. And Bill Clinton saying that, I think, is the first, how should we say, arrow in a whole quiver, because in the end, Hillary Clinton has got to separate herself from the Obama administration if she hopes to get elected.
Okay. Good point.
And I wanted to start tonight and talk about gun control, as the Supreme Court ruled yesterday in some decisions. Most importantly, it sent back to Massachusetts for a review. And it was very important. It was interesting. I learned something new about how conservative blogs sometimes take something and say one thing when it really says something else. But in effect, the Supreme Court ruled that the Massachusetts law against carrying guns, does not extend to carrying a taser. A woman was convicted for carrying a taser under the gun control laws, and the Supreme Court ruled that the law itself was faulty when it came to tasers, and the woman, in effect, has a new trial or something's going to happen. Gun control advocates said it was a major victory. It's not a major victory. All it's doing is trying to clarify the laws, which when it comes to tasers, it varies almost from municipality to municipality. It's part and parcel of some of the things that are going on in this country. Happily, gun control has taken a back seat to some other issues because it really is a state law rather than a federal law that's involved. And as long as the states have control of the gun control laws, we're pretty safe that we'll be able to carry arms. The NRA and its allies have been able to stifle the Congress. But I think in this campaign, coming campaign, you're going to see that issue brought to the fore under the guise of terrorism. Any thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, I was thinking about the decision was unanimous, 8-0. Clearly, I would think that the lower court, looking at the decision of the Supreme Court, 8-0, would have to take that in consideration, as would the prosecutors who were thinking about a new trial. Um, the whole idea of the Second Amendment, which early on in the campaign seemed to be coming under fire, and now Obama's new Supreme Court nominee, who has a record, from what I can gather, of rulings on the dissenting side, not on the majority, but on the dissenting side, really being against the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. Um, it may come back up after we get through the conventions as the Republicans try and stick their ground and not allow a justice who they believe is anti-Second Amendment to come up to sit in that chair in the Supreme Court chamber. It's a Go ahead. You want to say something?
No, I'll wait to the end of you.
You could be waiting a long time for that one, bud.
I know that, but that's okay. You got some good things to say.
Yeah, I do think that that the idea that the Second Amendment, or for that matter, any amendment as we have in our Constitution today, especially one of the original 10, should be up for review, seems to me to be ridiculous. We've had hundreds of years of this country and opportunities to challenge, and yet they continue to turn it away. But the left seems to keep coming back to whether it's freedom of speech or gun control or whatever. And it seems to me that the American people are reacting, not so much that, I mean, I don't own a gun, but I think if I wanted to own a gun, I should have the right to own a gun. I don't think that the Supreme Court should be telling me whether I can own a gun or not, or whether I can own a taser. If I acquire it legally and I have a license and I have the prerequisite training to be able to own it and use it. But the courts shouldn't be, again, this is the whole issue. Why this election is important about the court is that there's going to be a number of justices who will retire, and hopefully none of them will die, but that's certainly a possibility, where there could be a major shift in the court over the next presidency. And I think that the idea that we have to have people who are not interpreting the law in terms of creating new laws and legislating from the bench, but people who are like Justice Scalia, who were there to simply interpret the law, not to create new laws or legislate without the legislative process going forward. So the idea that tasers don't work, I mean, they didn't have tasers when back in the revolutionary time when the Constitution was driven and voted on by the various legislatures to approve it. But I do think that for some reason in this country we want to attack the Constitution and the rights that we've had for hundreds of years.
Well, that's normal. By the way, you know, of course, that one of the first laws that they wanted to take up in the first congressional session was the fact they wanted to outlaw the so-called Kentucky rifle, the long rifle that was so accurate in the war, in the Revolutionary War, and would prove very accurate in the War of 1812. Mm-hmm. There was actually a congressman that introduced legislation saying that the long rifle was too deadly a weapon. And I'll go back one further. A monk writing said the end of the world is upon us. The ultimate weapon has been found. Mankind faces extinction. He was talking about the English longbow, and after the Battle of Agincourt. I mean, technology will always move ahead of the laws. We have to learn to be patient as our lawmakers deliberate and figure ways of controlling new advances. This battle we're having over the various Apple iPhones, and suddenly the FBI, if you looked at today's paper, has found a way to break that code without the help of the Apple people. I think that's a kind of a foretaste of what the world's going to be like.
Well, that's interesting. You just talked about the Apple situation, because I'm wondering if they figured it out without Apple, what does that say about the security? You know, when they couldn't break the Apple phone, it was a great advertisement to everybody to buy iPhones because the government couldn't break it, and Apple refused to give them the code. So I'm questioning whether or not the story about that the government, the FBI, has cracked the phone is true or rhetoric to cover up something else that they've done, maybe a deal they've cut on the sidelines with Apple. But
Well, I happen to know a little bit about that, and I will assure you that the NSA has figured a way.
the NSA did it.
The National Security Agency. Someone told me 6 months ago there is no code that's not breakable if you have enough resources and enough time. And you can, particularly with this Apple thing, I think they have figured a way. Leastwise, that's what they said this morning. But that's my side of the fence. That seems to be working more and more. And the NRA, by the way, just put out a little sheet to its members, confident they'll be able to uphold the taser law and beat back the new Supreme Court nominee, who's very much anti-NRA.
Right, and anti-Second Amendment, as he has demonstrated in some of, as I said, his dissenting opinions. So we got to take another break. We'll be back shortly, so stay tuned.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona.
All right, fellas, you're clear.
They'll be
It's a good start of the show.
after these messages.
Thank you.
What do you say?
So it was a good start for the show.
The Brotherhood
Yeah.
of Nile of
What time?
We're cooking.
This is the final installment of the Brotherhood
Cooking.
trilogy, and over this series, we've been attacked by terrorists
Oh,
using weapons.
we're going too early.
Rebuild America.
You
from
told me
all the
8:23:30
destruction. In the last
or 8
book,
I know that, but I think next week we should go a little longer on these first two segments.
Oh, okay.
Because we're only 25 in.
Just follow them.
Well, by my clock.
It's the plan
What do you have, Dan?
I got 24 and change.
Why?
Yeah.
Will the president's plan work?
We should end the second segment
Out in the
at 30,
trilogy, the Brotherhood
in my
of
view.
Nile
We'll,
of
we'll give him a new script next week.
More information
Yes.
at www.danperkins.
And I want to talk about the bombing in this third segment.
Oh, yeah.
www.danperkins at SANI.
Everybody's going crazy over it.
Dan Perkins' new book, also available at Amazon.com.
Chad,
Worried about
Yes,
your
sir.
mom or dad?
we may go a little longer on this one because
Someone- Listen, I know
What do you want me to break it?
find senior
where are you breaking now?
It says 8:39:30.
8:31:30? No,
8:30.
39:30.
Okay, all right, that'll give us enough time.
That's all right. Okay.
39:40.
In your
Yeah.
at 1-800
Gives us 10 minutes to do the last segment.
Yeah.
A place for mom offers free one-on-one.
I think we do well on that because gives you 4, gives me 4 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
About senior care for your mom or dad. There's a place
Is it better without my glasses?
You know, there's no glare.
10 minutes to get your free ebook on financing senior care.
All right, fellas, here we go.
Information on senior living
Yeah,
communities.
remember, Don, they can see you drinking your glass.
6128.
I know.
All
I
right,
realized that after, but I badly needed it.
here we go.
Welcome back.
Listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Well, we're back again for our third segment, and now we want to talk about what a lot of people are talking about, which is mainline headline news across the world, and that's the bombings in Brussels today, or early this morning, the airport and the train station. It appears, based on the most recent numbers that I've saw, is at least 30 people are dead and 180 people are wounded, injured, some of them quite seriously, and they expect the possibility of the death toll to go up. And on ABC News tonight, they were talking about the fact of the arrest of the gentleman last week in Brussels, who was one of the leaders of the attack in Paris, who'd been on the run for some period of time. And when they arrested him, they found a huge cache of weapons that they confiscated, and there were thoughts about whether or not they did any more searches on a house-to-house basis to see if there were any more. Now, the area, from what I understand, that he was arrested last week is a predominantly Muslim area in Brussels, and no assimilation whatsoever on the government for these people. It was like a small Muslim town, and so they think that perhaps cohorts of his were responsible for the three bombers responsible for the bombs this morning. They did say that the bomb on the train, which killed more people and injured a lot more people than the airport, was a much more powerful bomb. And they showed photographs of the three possible suspects who were bringing the bombs into the train station. And as I watched the coverage of that this morning, very early on, I began to wonder when we in the United States will begin to understand that the carnage that's taking place in Europe is because of political correctness. The government's desperately needing laborers to come in and fill the jobs that the natives couldn't fill because the population growth rate wasn't sufficient to replace even those that were dying, much less jobs from potentially expanding economies. So it seems to me it's a very difficult problem, and how we as a nation cannot sit here and allow the same things that are happening in Europe happen in the United States and expect a different outcome. Now, we've been fortunate enough that we haven't had the mass situations like we had in Paris or Brussels, but I think it's only a matter of time that it's coming. Um, what's clear is that the American people still do not understand why these people hate us so much. They don't understand the Quran. They don't understand the mission of the Muslim faith to lead the world to the end of times. And infidels are people who are non-believers, and they're either taxed or killed. This is a group of people. Not saying it's the whole 1.3 billion members of the Muslim faith, but there is a large number, and it's not tens of thousands. It's perhaps millions of people that are involved in this violent attacks that are going on around the world. We're talking about how the nature of the attacks when they started off with the first beheading, how we were so outraged. And even the president was outraged that he had to come off the golf course to talk about this reporter getting his head chopped off. Um, but as we began to see more beheadings, we became more complacent, and it is the nature, I guess, for some reason, Americans. I don't know about Europeans, but in Americans, we see something that just terrifies us or makes us revolting, and yet the next time we see it, it's less impact. And I believe that the terrorists know that, and that's why I think the beheadings have not totally stopped, but the public beheadings of the nature of what's going on um, today is that they're moving people. They're moving people. When they started this great migration from Syria and from Africa into the Central and Western European region, they told us that they were going to smuggle in uh, terrorists into that, and they're smuggling back into the countries. They're getting back into the countries. The young people who lived in that country and are coming back and can blend back into the population. It just seems to me that we still don't want to deal with this problem in our own country. I saw a recent report where the Secretary of Homeland Security had pretty much ordered the border guards to just release people. Don't try and deport them back across the country, across the border. So we're sitting here watching this on television. We're we're sickened by the death and the destruction that's taking place in Brussels or in Paris or wherever, but we don't seem to be that concerned about it in the United States, and that bothers me because that's an area of complacency where we are just as vulnerable than what it is in Europe. Don?
You know, as I'm listening to you, I remember, and I'm going to say, where's John Wayne when we need him? You know, if you think about it, our country has always been one where if you hurt us, we hurt you back. And now we seem to be one, well, if you hurt us, we apologize. President Obama apologized to the Cuban people when the leader of Cuba said there are things wrong with the United States. there's always been things wrong with the United States, but there's always been things a lot more right about the United States. And when people have complained and done things, we go back, the Marine Corps, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. We go back to the time when we only had 3 frigates in the entire world, yet we took on the Barbary pirates. We took on the British in 1812, the Mexicans. We've taken on everybody, the Russians. Yes, we did that in the Northwest. And we've always done it when people have said, try to push us around. Now we're sitting there. You're complaining about how Americans seem to be complacent. I don't think they're complacent. I think they don't have the leaders who are willing to argue about and lead us and say we're going to do the things that we have to do. Dan, you're always talking and worried about, and rightly so, about an atomic bomb in New York smuggled in by ISIS. And you're right about that. I think this is a time when we really have to decide what kind of a nation we are. One that's sinking, or one that's rising. You remember Ben Franklin when they were signing the Declaration of Independence? He looked at the picture of a sun rising, and he said he didn't know whether it was rising or setting, but he knew the course we needed to take. Well, that to me is what we need to be doing today. We need to be really saying to ISIS and everybody else, you do that, you're really going to get hurt. I think it's time we did this. I agree with you on political correctness and everything else. And I think the people of Europe are beginning to realize that, and it's about time our American people did as well.
Yeah.
I'm back to you, Dan.
I was looking and listening to the president's historic trip to Cuba, and my dear wife said to me, I would, if I were Obama and found out that Raul was not going to be at the airport, or nobody was going to meet me at the airport, I'd have turned the plane around and went back home. And that's what Trump said yesterday. I'd have turned the plane and went home. How can we claim that we want to have diplomatic relations with Cuba when we can't even get the president of the country to meet our president who's making a historic visit? And what does that say about our leadership when the president, as you said, apologizes for what's going on in America, when you've got this vicious communist regime that murders people on a regular basis, and we're trying to establish diplomatic relations for them? I'm not sure I understand what it's going to do for us to establish diplomatic relations with Cuba, but the idea that we'll let the genocide continue and ignore it sends another message to the rest of the world that we don't really care, and we don't have a strong leader. I mean, the president would rather go and stay at a baseball game today rather than come home to work with some of the leaders in the world to try and deal with the problem that took place in Brussels and that's coming in other countries around the world. I think it's a problem, and I think that terrorism saw a vacuum with a lack of leadership and responsibility on the United States, and took that vacuum and filled it with themselves all over the world. And I'm very concerned that even if we have a cowboy, a John Wayne, that comes in elected in November and takes office in January, whether we are so far down the path that we cannot regain that stability that the world so desperately needs to have America to be a strong leader.
You know, Dan, you said cowboy. You remember what Mark Hanna said when Teddy Roosevelt became the president after the death of McKinley? He said quite simply, we got the cowboy in the White House. Mm-hmm. And I think those 6 years turned out pretty well for the United States. We took, and as Roosevelt said, we took Panama and built the Panama Canal. But on that note, I think we should really take note that Speaker of the House, Ryan, is going to make a speech tomorrow. His office won't release the speech, and I'm told that the speech will not be released until after he delivers it. And it's I don't know why he would at this point. As you know, I have great respect for Representative Ryan, having known him for almost 15 years now, and I feel very strongly that he may be leading up to something. I don't think it's to run for president, but I think it is for him to take a leadership role in the Republican Party about shaping a platform of a foreign policy platform that the American people can embrace and applaud. I think the one of the key issues at the convention, the Republican convention, will be to shape two planks: what they're going to do about the economy and what they're going to do about the foreign affairs. I think it's very important, and I think tomorrow's speech may be the first step in shaping a platform to go along with a candidate that may get us out of these doldrums.
Yeah, you said to me earlier before we started the show that the speech that Ryan's giving tomorrow is to the news media and to interns. Why would he choose that combination of people?
I have no idea. I've been trying to figure that out. Better you let the press in than let them interpret what other people who are at a session. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, except that given that the interns are really the next generation of leaders of our country, he may be wanting to say something very important to them. I don't know. No one seems to know. But the speech itself is a great surprise. It wasn't leaked. No one knew about it up until the time it was announced. It has the earmarks of being important. It may not be, but I think something that people should pay attention to, because I think it may have far-reaching effects on the presidential campaign and America in the future.
As I understand it, as Speaker of the House, he's the highest-ranking Republican in the party. He's also going to be the chairman of the Republican National Convention.
Yes, and also he started in succession to the presidency. Mm-hmm. Don't forget, we have Obama, we have Uncle Joe Biden, and then we have Speaker of the House. Interesting, in our generation, the Secretary of State was third in line, and he was appointed. You remember that?
Yes. We got to take a break. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Two Guys from.
Bells are clear.
Don Mazzella.
Okay.
They'll be back after a word from their sponsors.
What are you going to speak about in your segment?
Their house. Hi. Listen, I know how difficult it is to find senior care for someone you love. That's why I recommend a free service called.
I got several things. What's your thought? What do you want to do?
Referrals.
Well, I wanted to riff on about my day at Columbia with the students.
Living communities.
It really greatly affected me because they were all shapes and sizes, all ancestry. Mm-hmm. But by and large, there were people you would be proud that they were your sons and daughters.
Okay. Well, I want to do what I talked about this afternoon earlier, and that is the destruction of the language skills of American young people. So you can talk about the good guys and writers, and I'll talk about the bad guys.
Well, actually, I did bring that up in my class, and it's. I don't want to sound anti-union. I am. But it was interesting. These kids all recognized how important writing was. But of course, they're a self-selected group because they're the editors and reporters.
Sure.
Of the news. But it was interesting.
Okay. Tell us about it when you get back on. We'll let you go first.
Okay.
I like your shirt. Much better.
I realized. It's a sweater, actually, but I realized that. I'm totally dressed by my wife. Totally.
All right, here we go.
Dan Perkins at SAN.com. Dan Perkins' new book, also available at Amazon.com.
In this final segment, Don and Dan offer their predictions on what's going to happen in our world.
You're up, bud.
Well, I guess I'm going to start this week, and oftentimes we talk of doom and gloom, and I'd like to end my session talking about one of the nicest experiences that I go through every spring when I teach at the Columbia University Forum for High School Editors and Reporters from all over the country. I've been doing it for now 7 or 8 years, and it always refreshes my mind because, admittedly, they're self-selected and some of the best people in high schools across the country. But whenever I do, I'm always struck by three things. One, how bright and eager to learn they are. Two, how diverse they are. There's no question of black, white, Asian, red, whatever. They're all types. In my class alone, there was every representation. And I know there were at least 4 Italian Americans because I always bring that up, and I always get the same reaction, the hands up. And what strikes me about it each time, and struck me again last time, is how these kids look at the world and how more optimistic they are than certainly I sound at times, and how they have faith in America. They really feel, and they have faith in the bonds. I try to leave out my political leanings one way or the other in talking, because what I talk about is how to use your experience as editors and reporters to get into the college of your choice. But it does come out how that they are diverse, but they're also questioning, and they're also eager to learn and to be part of the next generation and to be part of the leadership. I'm probably sounding like a broken record, but at the end of the class, I always say the Republic is in good hands. It's the next generation. We've always felt that way, but at times Dan and I both fret about it because we're seeing a lot of changes from the time when he and I were that age and we looked at the future. But I really do believe that when all is said and done, the Republic will survive, and it'll grow and be once again the great power that it was when we started out life. Dan?
Well, I guess I'm Mr. Gloom and Doom. It's my turn. I appreciate that. I'm glad you shared that experience with us because I think it was important. But I have to take another side. I look at the reading and math scores of the students in our country today, and we're in the lower third in the top industrialized nations of the world. Lower third, yet we spend more money than any nation in the world per student on education. I was amazed recently to see the video team, the filmmakers who embedded themselves in the protest in the meeting in Chicago, where the MoveOn.org people shut down the venue, where preventing Mr. Trump from speaking. And I listened to watched the tape, watched the interviews with the people, primarily young people, male and female, mostly Bernie supporters, but about every third word that came out of their mouth was an expletive, beginning with the letter F. And when you think about that, if you're using that kind of vulgar profanity to try and communicate your message, what's happening is you are ineffective in your communications, because a lot of people that, for example, the students that you taught in your classes, will look at that language and look at the inability to effectively and coherently put a story together or a message or a position and not give them any credibility. I think that if you look at the protests that have taken place around the country, you see more and more of the same kind of situation. People who cannot articulate what it is they're standing for without significant vulgarities. And I think it's symptomatic of what's going on in our educational system. We have people that are not learning. We have people that don't graduate from high school. They can't get jobs. The unemployment rate for the black community for young people is over 50%. And so we have a society that's now not demanding any language skills. In fact, they're not demanding anything from anybody. They're basically saying, the government's saying, we'll take care of you. You don't need a job. The government will take care of your food and your medical care, and they'll take care of your housing. You don't have to try and realize the American dream. And we've got 48 million people on food stamps in this country. We got over 94 million people who are not working because they can't find a job. And I think it's part of the anger and the frustration that a lot of people who are working hard, paying their bills, trying to put money aside for their children for college or whatever, are angry at other people who are getting all this stuff for free, and yet they're not making a contribution to our society. Language is the key of communicating ideas and thought and messages. And if you can't speak, if you can't write without expletives, then you're not coherent and you will have no credibility with those people who are reasonably educated. So we have a society that is continuing to produce underachieving students in much greater number than your students, Don, who are achieving great things. But at the same time, remember that the media, the newspapers, the college yearbook, and those kinds of things are becoming more and more digital, and less need for newspapers as we see them close all over the country. That might be a job that's hard to come by going on into the future. But I'm very disturbed and very concerned about the inability of such a huge percentage of our generation, especially the younger generation, to be able to communicate their thoughts and ideas in an effective manner to build any credibility. And that's the language is how you build your credibility. If you can speak well, you can articulate your message, then you have the ability to have credibility. Without it, with only expletives to make your point, you're destroying the language. If we destroy our language, you destroy our ability to communicate to people. And it's not only permeating in riots and protests, it's in the classroom, it's in sporting events, it's in our records, it's in our music, it's in our TV, it's in our movies. The abuse of the language, the inability to effectively communicate is a sickness that we as a nation, if we can't improve our ability to speak, we're going to have a real problem. That's enough from me. Don, you want to say goodnight?
Well, I want to say goodnight, but next week I'll tell you something interesting on that point.
Okay.
But anyway, good night. We'll see you next week. You'll see me from St. Martin next week.
Right.
But that's okay.
Right. Somebody's got to do that. Don's book, you can get Don's book at donmazzillo.com. My books, as you heard, are available from amazon.com. The foundation is Songs and Stories for Soldiers. Thank you for listening. We look forward to you. Remember, go to the website, twoguysfromverona.com. Take care.
You've been listening to Two Guys from Verona.
Great show, fellas.